The bouquet slipped from Phoebe's hands when she saw the groomsman's face. The white roses scattered across polished stone, and for a moment, the only thing she could hear was her own heartbeat drowning out the string quartet, the champagne glasses clinking, the hundreds of guests pretending this was a love story. It wasn't. And the man standing 3 feet behind her groom, the one with eyes that had seen every inch of her skin just 6 weeks ago, knew it too. But let's start where it really began. Not at the wedding. Not at the altar where promises turn to ash. Let's go back to the night Phoebe decided to disappear. The bar was drowning in neon blues and the kind of music that made bad decisions feel second nature. She sat at the counter with her third whiskey, watching condensation run down the glass like tears she wouldn't let herself cry. The leather seat felt cold beneath her dress, and she liked that. Cold meant numb. Numb meant safe. She didn't come here to meet someone. She came here to forget she was someone. Then his voice cut through the noise, smooth and curious. You look like you're waiting for someone, or trying not to. Phoebe didn't turn immediately. She let his words hang in the air between them. Last thing she needed was A. When she finally looked up, she found a face that was too handsome for comfort. Dark eyes that held something dangerously close to understanding, and a smile that suggested he knew exactly what kind of night this was. "Guess you caught me doing both," she said, her voice dry, guarded. He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. Then here's to terrible timing. Their eyes met and held. Something sparked in that space, something reckless and alive. She should have looked away, should have finished her drink and gone home to her perfect apartment and her perfectly suffocating life. "You don't even know my name," she said instead. His smile deepened, knowing. "You don't look like someone who wants to say it." He was right. God, he was so right it hurt. Tonight, she didn't want to be Phoebe Mercer, daughter of a failing empire, the girl whose father's company was bleeding money faster than they could count it. She didn't want to be the solution to everyone else's problems. "You're right," she whispered, leaning forward just enough that the world around them began to blur. His name was Jack, she learned later, in whispers between tangled sheets in a hotel room where the city lights painted shadows across bare skin. Jack, who tasted like freedom and felt like falling. Jack, who asked no questions and made no promises. Jack, who disappeared into the morning light like he'd never existed at all. Some nights don't need reasons. They just happen. And some mistakes take 9 months to show themselves. But Phoebe didn't know that yet. Not when she walked into her mother's office 3 days later, still feeling the ghost of hands that weren't supposed to matter, still tasting goodbye on her lips. Martha Mercer sat behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars, her diamond ring catching the harsh morning sunlight as she slid a leather folder across the polished wood. Inside was a contract. Inside was Phoebe's future, typed out in legal terms and binding clauses. "You'll marry Richard Hawkstone," Martha said, her voice cool and efficient as always. "It's already arranged." The words hit Phoebe like ice water. She stared at the papers, at her name already printed on the signature line, waiting. "You can't just arrange my life like a business meeting." Martha's expression didn't change. She had perfected the art of looking at her daughter without really seeing her years ago. "I can win the company's drowning, and you're the only asset we have left. You want to save your father's name? Sign." Phoebe's fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk. The hotel room, Jack's laugh, the brief taste of something that felt like hers. It all seemed so far away now, like a dream she'd had in someone else's life. "You think selling me off fixes everything?" "It fixes me," Martha said, and for just a second, something raw flickered beneath her mother's perfect composure. "It fixes the debts. It fixes the board. It fixes what your father broke when he died and left us with nothing but his name and his mistakes." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken resentment and duty disguised as love. Phoebe looked at the contract again. Richard Hawkstone, billionaire, 38, cold eyes in every photograph. A man who collected companies the way other people collected coins. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. "I'm doing this for Dad," she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. She was doing this because she didn't know how else to survive. Because sometimes survival wears loyalty's mask, and sometimes you can't tell the difference until it's too late. She signed. The wedding came too fast. 3 weeks of dress fittings and seating charts and learning how to smile like she meant it. 3 weeks of not thinking about hotel rooms and strangers' hands and the kind of freedom that only lasts one night. Richard Hawkstone was exactly what she expected. Controlled. Precise. A man who looked at her, like she was another acquisition to be managed. During their brief, mandatory meetings before the wedding, he spoke about expectations and appearances and the importance of maintaining his image. He never once asked what she wanted. He never once looked at her like she was real. Try to look less terrified, he muttered as they stood in the preparation room before the ceremony, his hand adjusting his already perfect tie. It's bad press. Phoebe felt the corset of her wedding dress cutting into her ribs. I wasn't aware this was a photo opportunity. Everything is. His tone was flat, businesslike. Then he gestured toward the door. Cool, mate. I want you to meet my chief operations officer. He'll be working closely with us on the merger. The merger. That's what he called it. Not a marriage. A merger. She followed him out, her dress whispering against marble floors, her heart beating too fast for reasons she couldn't name. The garden was perfect, golden sunlight filtering through trees decorated with white ribbons and crystal, hundreds of guests in designer clothes pretending this was romance instead of transaction. Richard stopped near the arch where they'd soon exchange vows that meant nothing. Phoebe, this is Jack Morrison, my right hand. You'll be seeing a lot of him. The world tilted. Jack stood there in an expensive suit that somehow made him look like a stranger and exactly like the man she remembered all at once. His eyes widened, shock breaking through that controlled exterior he wore like armor. She watched his throat work, watched him fight for composure. You've got to be kidding me, he breathed, so quiet only she could hear. You two know each other? Richard's voice was sharp, suspicious. Every word Phoebe had ever known evaporated. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Blood rushed in her ears. The bouquet in her hands suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. No. She forced herself to look at Richard, to smile that practice smile. He looks familiar. Maybe I've seen him in articles about you. Jack recovered faster, extending his hand with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hawkstone. The name felt like a slap. Mrs. Hawkstone. She wasn't even that yet, and already she was drowning in it. Richard studied them both for a moment longer, his gaze calculating. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied. The ceremony starts in 10 minutes. Jack, make sure the photographers are positioned correctly. Of course, Jack said, and walked away without looking back. That's when the bouquet fell. That's when Phoebe felt her knees buckle and her vision swim, and the perfectly orchestrated wedding day dissolve into chaos. She woke up in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and regret. The machines beeped steadily beside her, monitoring a heartbeat that felt too loud, too insistent. Richard sat in the chair by the window, his face unreadable. You fainted, he said. Not quite a question, not quite an accusation. The doctors say you're pregnant. The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. What? Her voice came out hoarse, broken. Congratulations, Mrs. Hawkstone. He stood, buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. You've already given me a headline. Mysterious bride faints at billionaire's wedding. Whisked to hospital. Found to be carrying his child. The press will eat it up. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. It can't be. His eyes sharpened. What did you say? She forced herself to breathe, to think. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since that night. 6 weeks since Jack. The math was brutal and inescapable. Nothing. I just didn't expect it. We haven't even. I know. Richard's voice was cold. Which makes this rather interesting timing, doesn't it? Fear flooded her veins. What are you saying? I'm saying the wedding's postponed. I'm saying you're going to stay here until the doctors confirm everything. And I'm saying if there's anything you need to tell me, now would be the time. But she couldn't. How could she? How could she tell him that the child growing inside her belonged to his most trusted employee, that she'd met Jack before, that she'd let a stranger touch her in ways Richard never would, that this entire foundation was built on a lie she hadn't even known she was telling? There's nothing, she whispered, placing a hand on her stomach. Beneath the fear, beneath the panic, something else stirred. Something fragile and terrifying and impossibly real. A heartbeat she hadn't planned on hearing. A life she hadn't meant to create. I'm going to be a mother, she said, more to herself than to him. Richard watched her with those calculating eyes. Yes, you are. And I'm going to be a father, whether I like it or not. The wedding will happen in 2 weeks, once you're cleared. And Phoebe, he leaned down, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, almost human. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. You signed a contract. You made a deal. And I always collect on my deals. The wedding happened. A smaller ceremony this time, intimate and quiet, with her in a simple dress and him in his usual armor of control. Jack wasn't there. Richard had sent him to the Hong Kong office, or so he said. Phoebe stood at the altar and said words that felt like stones in her mouth and thought about heartbeats and hotel rooms and the way freedom tastes right before it kills you. The mansion Richard brought her to was beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, meant to be observed, not lived in. Chrome and glass and cold white spaces that echoed with emptiness. He set her up in the East Wing, in rooms that were hers in name only, and told her the doctor would visit twice a week to monitor the pregnancy. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, and left her there like furniture. The first month was lonely. The second was worse. By the third, Phoebe had learned the patterns of the house, the way Richard came and went like a ghost, the way the staff moved around her with polite disinterest, the way her stomach grew and nobody asked her how she felt. She spent her days in the library, reading books about pregnancy and trying not to think about whose child she was carrying. Trying not to wonder if Jack thought about her. Trying not to count the days until Richard discovered the truth. Then one night, she heard laughter. Woman's laughter, drifting up from the lower floor, mingling with the sound of Richard's voice, deeper than she'd ever heard it, almost warm. Phoebe stood in the hallway, 5 months pregnant, wearing an oversized sweater that hid nothing, and watched Richard escort a woman in red to the guest wing. The woman's hand was on his arm. His smile was genuine. When he came back down, he found Phoebe waiting. "She's staying the night again?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like glass. Richard barely looked at her. "You said you didn't want anything from me. I didn't mean this." She hated how her voice broke, hated the tears burning behind her eyes. "I didn't mean you'd bring other women into our home while I'm carrying." "While you're carrying what, Phoebe?" He turned to face her fully now, and his expression was devastating in its emptiness. "My heir? The child that will legitimize this arrangement? You're a transaction, a means to an end. I never promised you love." The words landed like blows. "I know. I just thought, respect. Just that. Just basic human respect." Something flickered in his eyes then, something that might have been regret or recognition or just exhaustion. But it died as quickly as it came. "You knew who I was when you signed." He walked away, and Phoebe stood there with her hand on her growing stomach, feeling the baby move beneath her palm, and wondered how many more lies she could survive. If you're still with me, you know this story's about to get darker. If you want to see how far Phoebe falls before she finds her way back, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Jack came back in her 6th month. She saw him first in the garden, talking on his phone, pacing like he used to pace in that hotel room while she watched from the bed. Her heart did something stupid and painful in her chest. She shouldn't have approached him. She should have walked away. But pregnancy had made her reckless, or maybe she'd always been reckless and just didn't know it yet. "Jack!" He turned, and the look on his face was complicated, guilt and longing and something harder, something calculating. "Phoebe." They stood there for a long moment, the garden buzzing with life around them, her stomach a visible barrier between who they'd been and who they were now. "We need to talk," he said finally. They met 3 days later at a cafe on the edge of the city, far from Richard's world, in a corner booth where rain tapped against the windows like nature's own soundtrack to disaster. Phoebe wore dark sunglasses and a hood, disguising her pregnancy as best she could. Jack looked tired, older than his 29 years. "It's mine, isn't it?" His whisper was urgent, desperate. "The baby. It's mine. Don't say that here." Phoebe glanced around, paranoid, her heart racing. "Don't ever say that. You're scared." His hand reached across the table, but stopped short of touching hers. "Jesus, Phoebe, I'm scared too. If Richard finds out, he'll destroy me. He'll destroy both of us. Then don't give him a reason to." Her voice was sharp with panic. "We had one night. One. It doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" His eyes searched hers, and she saw it then. The desperation. Not for her. Not for the child. Something else. "I need money, Phoebe." The words didn't compute at first. "What?" "I need money. A lot of it. I have debts. Bad debts. The kind that get people killed." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "And you're going to help me." Her blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? You're Richard Hawkstone's wife. You have access to accounts, to funds. And you owe me. For keeping your secret. For not telling him the truth about whose baby you're really carrying." The cafe seemed to shrink around her. The man across from her wasn't the one from the bar, the one who'd made her feel alive for a few stolen hours. This was someone else. Someone hungry and hollow and dangerous. "You're blackmailing me," she breathed. Jack's expression was almost apologetic. "Almost. I'm surviving. Just like you are. We all do what we have to do, right? That's what you told yourself when you married him for money. I'm just following your lead. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw her water in his face, wanted to rewind 6 months and erase that night, erase him, erase every choice that had led her here. But she couldn't. She could only sit there, pregnant with his child, married to his boss, and feel the trap close around her completely. How much? The words tasted like poison. $500,000. To start. To start. She almost laughed. It was too absurd, too dark. I don't have access to that kind of money. Richard controls everything. Then figured out. Jack stood, dropping cash on the table. You have 2 weeks. Or I tell him everything. He walked out into the rain, and Phoebe sat there with her hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, and wondered if love ever starts clean or if it's always born from something broken. The money was harder to get than she expected. Richard watched her like a hawk, controlled every penny, questioned every expense. But Phoebe was desperate, and desperation makes you creative. She sold jewelry piece by piece, forged signatures on minor accounts, borrowed against credit cards Richard didn't know existed. It took 3 weeks, not 2. Every day, she expected Jack to make good on his threat. Every time Richard looked at her, she waited for the accusation. But it never came. Instead, something worse happened. She woke one night to the sound of crying. Not her crying, the baby's. Her son, 3 weeks old, with Richard's last name in Jack's eyes, sleeping in the nursery down the hall. Except he wasn't sleeping. The nursery was empty. The window was open, and there was a note on the crib in handwriting she recognized. I need more. You know where to find me. You have 24 hours. Phoebe's scream brought Richard running. She'd never seen him move so fast, never seen that mask of control crack so completely. He read the note once, his face going white, then grabbed his phone with shaking hands. This is Richard Hawkstone. I need police in my residence immediately. My son has been taken. The next 6 hours were hell. Police flooded the mansion. Questions flew at her like bullets. Where had she been? Did she know anyone who might want to hurt the child? Had there been any threats? She couldn't tell them about Jack. Couldn't explain the blackmail without explaining everything else. So she lied again, added another layer to the foundation built on deception, and prayed her son would survive her mistakes. Richard stood by the window in the library, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with something that looked like barely contained violence. If anything happens to him, it won't. Phoebe's voice was hollow. It won't, Richard. I promise. How can you promise that? He turned, and his eyes were red-rimmed, raw with an emotion she'd never seen before. How can you promise anything when you won't tell me the truth? What truth? But she knew. Of course she knew. He's not mine, is he? The question was soft, deadly. That child. He's not mine. The room tilted. Richard. Don't. He held up a hand. Don't lie to me anymore. I've known since the hospital. Since you said it can't be before you caught yourself. I had them run DNA tests. I've known for 3 weeks that the child sleeping in my house, wearing my name, isn't my son. Phoebe couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world was ending, had been ending, and she'd just been too blind to see it. Then why? Because I'm a fool. His laugh was bitter. Because somewhere in the middle of this disaster, I started to care about you. About him. About the idea that maybe I could have something real instead of just things I own. He crossed to her, grabbed her shoulders, not rough but firm. Who took our son, Phoebe? Who's Jack to you? She broke. After months of holding it together, of carrying lies like stones, she finally shattered. He's the father. We met once before before any of this. I didn't know. I didn't know he worked for you until the wedding. And now he's blackmailing me. He took our son because I couldn't get him enough money fast enough. And Richard was already moving, phone back to his ear, barking orders. Find Jack Morrison. Now. Track his phone, his car, everything. And get me a team ready. The police located Jack 2 hours later at a warehouse near the docks. He was panicked, they said. Trapped. He'd taken the baby as leverage but hadn't thought past that moment. Hadn't planned for the reality of a crying infant or the police closing in or Richard Hawkstone's fury. Richard and Phoebe arrived just as the storm broke overhead, rain hammering down like judgment. Blue police lights cut through the darkness. And there, in the warehouse entrance, stood Richard holding a crying, wet but safe baby in his arms. Phoebe sobbed as she ran to them, taking her son, checking him over with shaking hands. Is he okay? Oh God, is he? He's fine. Richard's voice was rough, exhausted. Jack didn't hurt him. He just He just ran. Tried to cross the street when the police came. Didn't make it. The words took a moment to land. What? He's dead, Phoebe. It's over. She should have felt relief. Should have felt vindicated. Instead, she just felt tired. So impossibly tired. I never meant to lie to you. Richard looked at her. Really looked, maybe for the first time since they'd met. Not at the deal, or the image, or the acquisition. Just at her. A woman holding a baby in the rain, broken and scared and trying. And I never meant to care, he said quietly. But here we are. They stood there as the police cleared the scene, as the rain slowed to drizzle, as dawn started to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink. Eventually, Richard led them to the car, drove them home through empty streets, carried the sleeping baby upstairs while Phoebe followed on numb legs. She didn't sleep, just sat on the balcony watching the city wake up, her son in her arms, safe and alive and oblivious to the disaster his birth had caused. Richard found her there an hour later. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then stepped out and placed a hand on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, uncertain. What now? Phoebe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He was quiet for a long time. Then, we start over. If you'll let me. What? She looked up at him. This man she'd married for money and survival. This stranger who'd somehow become the only stable thing in her chaos. Why would you want to start over with me? His smile was sad, small. Because forgiveness isn't about deserving it. It's about being too tired to keep bleeding. And because he paused, his jaw working. Because when I saw you in that hospital, terrified and brave, and when I held our son, not mine by blood, but mine because I chose him, I realized I'd rather have this messy, broken thing than any of the perfect, empty ones I had before. Phoebe's tears came fresh then, but they were different. Lighter somehow. I don't know how to do this. How to be someone's wife for real. And I don't know how to be someone's husband. So we'll figure it out together. He sat down beside her, careful not to wake the baby. No more lies. No more contracts. Just us. However messy that looks. However messy, she echoed. They watched the sun rise together, three people bound by circumstance and choice, and the stubborn, stupid hope that broken things could still hold light. Before we close this story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between survival and honesty? Have you ever felt trapped in a life you didn't design? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This community is built on real conversations, and I read every single one. And if this story grabbed you, if you stayed till the end, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started with stories that dig deep, that don't shy away from the complicated, that honor the fact that sometimes love doesn't come easy to the broken, but sometimes, if we're lucky, it finds us anyway. Because here's what Phoebe learned in those weeks that followed. Love isn't the lightning strike. It's not the hotel room, or the stranger's hands, or the rush of escape. Love is the slow dawn after the storm. It's choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It's Richard learning to hold a baby that isn't his blood, but is his son. It's Phoebe learning to accept kindness without suspicion. It's both of them building something real on the ruins of something transactional. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it's theirs. 6 months later, Phoebe stood in the same library where she'd signed away her freedom. But this time, she wasn't signing a contract. She was helping Richard with the company, working as an equal partner, using her business degree she'd thought was useless. The baby, they named him James, was asleep upstairs, loved by a father who chose him and a mother who learned that mistakes don't define you unless you let them. Richard was different too, softer at the edges. He'd let go of the woman in red and the hollow pursuits and the idea that control equaled happiness. He still worked too much, still forgot to eat lunch. But he came home. He asked about her day. He held his son, their son, and looked at him like he was magic. Do you regret it? Richard asked one night as they stood on that same balcony where they decided to begin again. Marrying me? All of this. Phoebe thought about it. Really thought. I regret the lies. I regret Jack. I regret not knowing myself well enough to make better choices. She leaned into his shoulder. But I don't regret you. Not anymore. Not anymore, he repeated, amused. You were pretty terrible at first. So were you. I know. They laughed, and it felt like freedom. Not the reckless kind she'd chased in bars and hotel rooms. The real kind. The kind that comes from being known completely and chosen anyway. So here's to the broken ones. The ones who make mistakes. The ones who sign contracts they don't understand and sleep with strangers and lie to survive. Here's to the messy, complicated truth that sometimes the wrong choice leads somewhere right. That sometimes the person you married for money becomes the person you'd choose for love. That sometimes redemption looks like a sunrise and a baby's laugh and a hand on your shoulder that says, I see you, all of you, and I'm staying. Thank you for being here, for letting me tell you Phoebe's story. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it kept you here until the very last word, share it. Comment your truth. Like it if you felt something. And subscribe, because we're building something here. A space for stories that matter, that challenge, that don't wrap up neat, but wrap up real. Until next time, remember, you're more than your worst decision. You're more than your biggest mistake. And love, when it's real, doesn't demand perfection. It just asks you to keep trying. See you in the next one.